New York City has just banned short-term rentals. I want to talk about this new regulation, how it impacts existing hosts, people who want to get into short-term rentals, and what you can do about it. Before we get started, make sure you guys subscribe to my channel, turn on the notifications so you don't miss any future videos. And I'm going to pull up the article and let's get through it together. Starting September 5th, New York City began enforcing restrictions on short-term rentals that could push visitors away from booking platforms such as Airbnb into the arms of hotels. Local Law 18 includes several rules that travelers might find troublesome. For example, no more than 2 paying guests can stay in a short-term rental at a time, no matter the size of the dwelling or the number of bedrooms. I think what's happening here is, Airbnb filed a lawsuit against the city, and what this did, it prolonged the implementation of the new regulation, which, allowed Airbnb to make more money for, a few more years, as well as host. And now they must have came to an agreement where they couldn't completely ban Airbnbs. So what they did is they created so many limitations where, maybe only like 5 to 10% of people will actually continue to host. Because now you cannot rent out an entire apartment. You cannot rent out an entire studio. You cannot rent out an entire home. You can only rent out to a maximum of 2 people per Airbnb. But it gets worse. Let's keep reading. The host must be physically present while their properties are being rented. So, a lot of people, especially in areas like New York, where there's just a large population and a lot of tourism, people will often, travel, say, to Europe. And while they're in Europe, they rent out their places. So now you can't do that. You have to physically be present in order for you to be able to rent out your property. So that for sure creates another layer of limitation. It gets worse. Hosts and visitors must leave the doors inside the dwelling unlocked so occupants can access the entire unit. So even if I decided to, rent my apartment, if I had one, right, in New York, and say it's a 3-bedroom apartment and I'm renting out 2 bedrooms, person A, person B, and then I have my room. I have to leave my personal room unlocked where I have my personal belongings, my laptop, maybe some, money stashed under my pillow or under the mattress. And what about the guests? They have their personal and valuable belongings in their rooms. You cannot have the rooms locked. In my opinion, what they are doing in New York is basically shutting down Airbnb, said Lisa Grossman, a travel agent who for years has used short-term rental platforms to list an apartment in her Manhattan home. People who want to stay in an apartment don't want to be roommates with somebody, so there's really no option. You are either a roommate or you're in a hotel. What does this mean for existing hosts who were previously renting out entire apartments, studios, homes, condos, townhomes, right? Well, now it means that they can no longer operate under 30-day stays. They're going to have to do 30-day plus stays, which are midterm rentals, which depending on the area, if they're near highways and airports and hospitals, can work, right? Focusing with, travel nurses and using platforms still like Airbnb and Furnished Finder. And again, over the years, people have began to stay longer and longer at Airbnb. So now Airbnb, has an area in their platform where, well, technically with all the listings, you can go in there and set 30-day plus days, and you can just decide on properties that only accommodate midterm rentals, and then you don't have to worry about the short-term rental regulations. In short, if you were previously renting out entire units, now you can no longer operate. So what should you do in that situation? One, you can go to 30-day plus, as I just mentioned, or if you are able to go into the next nearest city that does allow short-term rentals where you can get a permit, then that's something that you can do. Now, obviously, if you own this property, you'll either put a long-term tenant in there or do 30-day plus days. If this is a sublease, one that you're doing arbitrage, you could just rent it to a long-term tenant that can maybe rent it slightly above fair market rent. So let's say you're renting a property for $3,000, but now you got furniture, appliances, decor, supplies, and it looks, pretty awesome and top notch, maybe you can rent it for $3,300, $3,500, $3,700, $3,800 depending on the fair market rents. Especially if you got that lease a couple years ago, the rents may be a lot higher and you can still arbitrage from a long-term tenant. In fact, I'm doing that with one property that I started arbitraging in 2019. 6 months later, they implemented a regulation that no longer allowed me to operate, and I started renting that property for $3,000. I rented it to someone else for $3,500 6 months later, and I still have that property today after 3+ years, and I make $500 a month of clean net cash flow. And we speak to the tenant maybe twice a year. So that's an option if you're arbitraging. You can also do midterm rentals, right? 30-day plus. Or if none of those work, you could always restructure the agreement with the landlord. Hopefully they understand the situation, the ban. Let them know that you want to terminate the lease. Hopefully you can get your deposit back and then take your furniture and appliances to the next best city where you can get a permit, and then boom. Or you could put a long-term tenant, right? If the landlord didn't want you to break the lease and they said you were going to lose your deposit, you could find a long-term tenant that will move in for the remainder of the lease, even if you break even every month. Collect your deposit, and then go and take your business to the next best city where you can get a permit. Those are going to be your best options. You know, back when I got started in 2017, most cities were gray areas. What that means is they didn't actually issue permits, but you sort of weren't allowed to do it. So, you know, we've been riding the wave ever since. But over the last few years, there's a lot more regulation and implementation of ordinances, which I find to be a great thing. And here's why. Let's say the city of New York said, hey, we're going to allow short-term rental permits, but we're only going to issue 2,000 permits, for example. And let's say previously, maybe there was 3,000 units, but now they're going to bring down that supply from 3,000 unpermitted units to 2,000 permitted units. Well, guess what? All the demand to stay at Airbnbs is still going to be there, but they're going to compress the inventory to 2,000 units. So now there's going to be higher occupancy, higher prices because of supply and demand, and those 2,000 hosts who have permits will actually make more money. So when there is regulation, I see this as a positive thing because, again, supply and demand, those who have a permit will make more money. My recommendation for those of you watching this video today is only launch short-term rentals in cities where you can actually get a permit and operate, 2-3 night stays without the 30-night minimum requirement, because that's going to allow you to build a sustainable and scalable business model. I am going to make another video where I go more in depth of exactly how to proceed when, again, city implements regulations just like this. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you guys hit that like button. And as always, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, and I'll see you guys on the next one.